This is the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohim.
Do you know of the water of life? It's very dangerous. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood use it to see within. There is a place terrifying to us, to women. It is said a man will come. He will go where we cannot. Many men have tried.
They tried and failed?
They tried and died.
Hello once again, and welcome wherever you may be. I'll read a little bit about reincarnation, or recurrence as Gurdjieff calls it. And I have some material from Evola about the traditional path of transcendence for women. Here there's definitely a change in the seasons and it's very bright out there. But it's still freezing and I have to remind myself that it's winter. On one occasion, at one of these meetings, someone asked about the possibility of reincarnation and whether it was possible to believe in cases of communication with the dead. "Many things are possible," said she, "but it is necessary to understand that man's being, both in life and after death, if it does exist after death, may be very different in quality. The man-machine, with whom everything depends upon external influences, with whom everything happens, who is now one, the next moment another, and the next moment a third, has no future of any kind. He is buried and that is all. Dust returns to dust. In order to be able to speak of any kind of future, there must be a certain crystallization, a certain fusion of man's inner qualities, a certain independence of external influences. If there is anything in a man able to resist external influences, then this very thing itself may also be able to resist the death of the physical body. But think for yourself what there is to withstand physical death in a man who faints or forgets everything when he cuts his finger. If there is anything in a man, it may survive. If there is nothing, then there is nothing to survive. But even if something survives, its future can be very varied. In certain cases, a fuller crystallization, what people call reincarnation, may be possible after death, and in other cases what people call existence on the other side. In both cases it is the continuation of life in the astral body, or with the help of the astral body. What may be called the astral body is obtained by means of fusion, by means of terribly hard inner work and struggle. Only very few men acquire it. If it is formed, it may continue to live after the death of the physical body, and it may be born again in another physical body. This is reincarnation. If it is not reborn, then in the course of time it also dies. It is not immortal, but it can live long after the death of the physical body. Fusion and inner unity is obtained by means of friction, by the struggle between yes and no in man. If a man lives without struggle, if everything happens without opposition, If he goes wherever he is drawn or wherever the wind blows, he will remain such as he is. But if a struggle begins in him, and particularly if there is a definite line in this struggle, then gradually permanent traits begin to form themselves. He begins to crystallize. Crystallization is possible on a right foundation, and it is possible on a wrong foundation. The struggle between yes and no can easily take place on a wrong foundation. For instance, a fanatical belief in some or other idea or the fear of sin can evoke a terribly intense struggle between yes and no, and a man may crystallize on these foundations, but this would be a wrong, incomplete crystallization. Such a man will not possess the possibility of further development. In order to make further development possible, he must be melted down again, and this can be accomplished only through terrible suffering. I do observe animals, birds and dogs and cats and whatever is around, and they do have a reasoning. You can see that they're thinking. But they're thinking only within their frame of reference, within their wings and their paws. They don't see from outside. Their thinking is relative. The three forces are not unified in their intelligence. That is the difference with men. Men have the ability for that to happen. Whether it does or not is another question. Now, the man-machine may be discarded dust to dust, but that is not all a person is. All men wish to be born, and all men wish to be known so that they can be born. Gurdjieff said once that we do not understand each other, and really the contact, person to person, every day is very poor. We do not know each other in a way that would help each other to be born. There is the idea of looking in someone's eyes and to feel somebody's real essence as you feel your own. You must be seated in your own heart, otherwise you cannot feel the heart of he who is in front. I have the sense that a person who has a good heart and has lived that way will live on as a good heart, meaning that there will be a sense of love which will be them, and that they will survive, and that lives eternally. The Victorians tried to communicate with spirits who lived on the other side. Some of these were just faint voices, and some were more dynamic. They were whole personages. And yet others had bodies. They were able to move things. And this shows the different level of crystallization in people. As we live here, we have a physical body. We can do many things, but it is given, and it is not created. The body that we would have after the death of the physical body is a body that we create. This puts a rather high bar on things. In Europe, before about 1700, it was considered normal to spend a lot of time doing religious practice, especially as you got older. Today in the Western world, there is a very little that is visible, and it's hard for people to understand how people used to live, which is to prepare the next life during this life, and to see yourself as the great chain of being, as part of the entire life current, and not as an atomized consumer. Up, up! Only a little time is left. The road before you is long, and you are immersed in illusion. Some people say that they are interested in the intellectual part of the Gurdjieff work. It means that they like reading. and there is no such thing. Gurdjieff started all students with a pick and a shovel. Hard physical work because he had to get something new inside of you. It's not possible to observe somebody who has been dead for 30 or 40 years. There's nothing alive left. First, put something alive in there. And then there is the devotional work. His students were devoted to him. Another aspect of Gurdjieff was his ability on the one hand to make himself almost invisible, and on the other to make himself appear like one of the rishis, blazing with energy and radiance. When visitors were being shown round the grounds, they would sometimes pass him with only a glance, like an American who was talking to me about what a wonderful man Mr. Gurdjieff must be, and that he would like to meet him. Just then Gurdjieff passed by and went into the house. "That is Mr. Gurdjieff," I said. "Well," he replied, "isn't that queer? I spoke to him in the grounds and thought he was the gardener." In ordinary life, people play roles unconsciously. Gurdjieff played them consciously, and those who worked closely with him usually knew when he was playing a role. In a letter to a dervish, he wrote, "The sign of a perfected man and his particularity in ordinary life must be that, in regard to everything happening outside of him, he is able to, and can, as a worthy action, perform to perfection externally the part corresponding to the given situation, but at the same time never blend or agree with it. In my youth, I too, as you more or less know, being convinced of the truth of this, worked on myself very much for the purpose of attaining such a blessing as I thought predetermined by heaven, and after enormous efforts and continuous rejection of nearly everything deserved in ordinary life, I finally reached a state where nothing from the outside could really touch me internally, and so far as acting was concerned, I brought myself to such perfection as was never dreamed of by the learned people of ancient Babylon for the actors on the stage." So here we see Gurdjieff pushing and pulling, struggling internally within his personality, playing a role, releasing a role, taking on a different role, separating, using this method to separate from the world. In fact, what Gurdjieff learned on reflection is that in every action, in every moment, you could do something. Because you have only a certain amount of moments in your life. Now, I'm not talking about being mindful and being in the fucking moment. I'm talking about doing some real work. I'm talking about separating into the planes. Separating, purifying, reintegrating. That is the method. I'm talking particularly about doing more than what is required of you. And that is the war against sleep. In walking down the high street the other day, I had this strange sense again that human beings, yes, they live in a hypnotic rhythm, almost as if there is a glamour over them, a glamour in the magical sense, as if they have been charmed, as if there is a certain kind of energy that glitters over them so they don't really see what is happening. A little like Sleeping Beauty. I don't know how this happened, and truly I'm starting to question all received wisdom. One aspect of it is that human beings do suffer enormous pain due to the inner conflict of the false self, and I think they may be putting themselves to sleep until somebody arrives who has an answer, because they couldn't deal with their lives in another way. But does anybody have an answer? I had the insight this week that meaning comes when a body is evolving. That is meaning. The tree is the body that grows towards the light, and the light shines down on the body. And that is the order of things, that is the interaction of heaven and earth. On this catastrophic planet, in the last 100 years, the body of the Western nations has been extremely damaged, so that these populations, which were once 99% white people, are no longer 99% white people, even if they had been for thousands of years. The body is being damaged. And the consequence of this is that there is no longer much meaning. What can there be? It is like for a tree. If a tree wakes up in the morning and one of its branches is black, the other is brown, and another is yellow, what meaning does its life have anymore? This is all wrong and has to be absolutely stopped. It would be disastrous. And if one tree is destroyed in this way, then all the trees will be. And if one tree is protected in this way, then all the trees will be protected. In the West, you see many things where people are losing sense of meaning. They don't care what they do anymore. I had this funny thought that, in another 10 or 20 years, even the horrible corporate medicine that we have today, that will actually vanish and it will become illegal to practice it, because the only thing that will be allowed is AI medicine. But the corporate medicine today is a very far cry from the family doctors that would come out and see people in their community that would know the family. They would know the grandfather and the grandmother, and they would know what kind of diseases are traveling in this family, what kinds of maladies are happening to people in certain regions. People knew each other, they knew their names, they knew their family names. And the family doctor was replaced at one time with wartime medicine that became managed wartime medicine, and then it became corporate medicine, and in the future it will be AI medicine. And as it advances, laws are passed to make the previous generation illegal. Looking back to the classical world, people lived at ease. People did not rush around. People lived at ease. They tried to talk to each other calmly and communicate ideas and share culture and listen to teachers and spend time with each other. And yes, they would fight and they would practice medicine and they would do many things. But life was not rushing around like people do today. I have a passage from Evola about certain traditional ideas about the path for women. And I will just pass this one paragraph from Gurdjieff. As I have said, everything is in motion. No motion follows a straight line, but has simultaneously a twofold direction, circling around itself and falling towards the nearest center of gravity. I just came across this passage by Evola, and so I shall read it out. There are many different views of the possible development of women. This traditional sacrifice, which was regarded as a sheer barbarism by Europeans and by westernized Hindus, in which the widow was burnt alive with the body of the dead husband, is called Sati in Sanskrit, from the root Sat, the being, from which the word Satya, the truth, comes. Sari also signifies a gift, faithfulness, love. Therefore the sacrifice was considered as the supreme culmination of the relationship between two beings of different sex, and as the sign of the absolute type of relationship, from the point of view of truth and a superhumanity. In this context, man provides the role of the support for a liberating bhakti, and love becomes a door and a pathway. According to the traditional teaching, the woman who followed her husband in death attained heaven. She was transformed into the same substance as her deceased husband, since she partook of that transfiguration, which occurred through the incineration of the material body into a divine body of light, symbolized among Aryan civilizations. We find an analogous renunciation of life in the Germanic women if their husbands or lovers died in battle. I will mention here some ancient views that expressly describe the pure type of the traditional woman who is capable of an offering that is half human and half divine. In the Aztec Nahua tradition, the same privilege of heavenly immortality proper to the warrior aristocracy was partaken of by the mothers who died while giving birth, since the Aztecs considered this sacrifice on the same level as the one made by those who die on the battlefield. Another example is the type of the traditional Hindu woman, a woman who, in the deepest recesses of her soul, was capable of the most extreme sensuality, and yet who lived by an invisible and votive tides. I have previously suggested that the essence of bhakti consists of indifference towards the object or the means of an action, that is, in pure action and in a selfless attitude. This may help us to understand how the ritual sacrifice of a widow could have been institutionalized in a traditional civilization such as the Hindu. A woman may give herself and even sacrifice herself only because of a stronger and reciprocated bond of human passion towards another being, and she participates in a transcendent dimension. In Christian Europe, the idea of God was taken by a woman to renounce her public life and to withdraw to a cloistered life, and even in this case, this was the choice of only a few. Take care.
For theirs is the kingdom,